All right, welcome back, everyone. This is CP Theology Online Learning, Chapter 5 of The Great Divorce. I originally was not going to do a video for this one, but after reading it again, I realized that it's a bit of a difficult chapter, but if you really look at it, based upon the things that we've done already this year, it's not as difficult as it seems. So let's start out with what we're dealing with in this chapter. Okay, so what we have in chapter 5 is we have a conversation between the fat ghost with a cultured voice. We actually come to find out that he's a bishop, or was a bishop on Earth. And the narrator watches the conversation between him and a bright spirit who was his friend and worked with him on intellectual pursuits and things at college while he was alive, named Dick. And what is set out right away is that when they were on Earth, and especially beginning their careers in the academic world, you find that both the fat ghost and Dick would go into the classroom, go into their studies, and look at sort of what the professor wanted. And I mean, in some sense, we always do this. We go into a class, we try to figure out what the teacher's looking for, and that way, if we provide those answers, it'll correspond to what the teacher wants, then you'll get an A. Okay? What they tended to do then is that they took this to sort of an extreme. They got in with this sort of group of thinkers that sort of pushed envelopes, always come up with new or like greater ideas, etc. And at first it was simply just to conform to them, to be brought into that relationship with them, to be liked by the group, to have a voice in the group, and so they started just writing and coming up with theses and writing things that corresponded to the way that other people thought, and so that throughout the majority of their early careers, this is what they did. They would go into things and see what was the current trend of thought, and let's go with that. Let's go with that flow. That's what you find, that the conversation begins this way. Now, with the fat ghost, you get the idea, though, that they began, and both did, as what you call a seeker. What I mean by seeker is that when they actually went into intellectual pursuits, they wanted to know what the truth was. Right? It seemed to be that's what they were after. But as time goes on, they become less concerned with the truth and more concerned with being relevant to the people that they're around. So it's it's sort of like the gang mentality, that when you're outside of a gang and you look at people and you realize that what they're doing is bad, and you wonder why they can't see it the way that you see it, it's because when you're in that environment and you're continually doing the thing that you're doing, you don't see it as a problem. And this is exactly what's happening in their thought process, and especially within the fat ghost. I mean, he claims that he writes speeches, he gives papers, all these things that he'll be recognized as relevant, to the point where, I mean, he's liked by that crowd. He seems to be at the front runner of this trend of thought that pushes envelopes and comes up with imaginative ideas and sounds very intellectual, etc. But I think the point that Dick is going to make, and a point that I think that we've been making all year, is that the more this continues, the more that you sort of adapt yourself and your thought to some trend or some group or some ideological vision, right? There is a danger that you can lose a touch with reality. And this is what we see. The first thing we read in this class was about, and it was from C.S. Lewis, was about the witch, and there was the prince that would sort of go into madness and was strapped to a chair, but then breaks free the one day, and then when she comes in, she sort of drops incense. Right? She realizes that he's broken out of her spell, so she drops incense. They begin breathing it in, and they go back to thinking the way that she wants them to think. Remember, it says it got down into his blood and bones, And this is what's happening with the fat ghost. He starts off by putting forth these ideas because he wants to seem relevant to the common sort of trend of thought. But then he begins to do it so much, to write a certain way, to write, writing to please a certain type of thinker, that then he actually begins to believe it. Right? It's almost like when you tell yourself a lie, and at first you know it's a lie, but the more you tell yourself that you didn't do it, it's not only that you're convincing or attempting to convince other people, but you begin to convince yourself that you really do believe that you didn't do what you really did. Right? So there's sort of a disconnect here between what is real and what is not. Goes problem then is this. I mean, it comes up to this quote right at the beginning here. We tend to think that we are right because we refuse to believe that we can be wrong. Right? I mean, he refuses to accept truth because this would be a problem for him, because then if something that he's teaching would not conform to truth, he would have to admit that he's wrong, and that would be conformity for him. And for him, he sees that as a hit against his freedom, that it wouldn't. I mean, what fun is it, he says, if we have to conform to some truth that's already there? That it's better to sort of just make this up as we go along, be inventive with our minds, etc. So instead of seeing reality as it is, truly, he claims that what counts as real is what he says is real. And this is how he escapes ever being wrong. It's why it's called the sin of the intellect and intellectual pride, is because before he does anything, physically or some action in the world, he's already made up his mind that whatever he's going to do is correct. So if he's the only one who determines whether something is right or wrong, well, then he'll never be wrong. And he seems to find solace in this, that it makes him, fills him with a joy to realize that I'm always going to be correct. Like, I can always push the boundaries. I could say whatever I want, because if I'm sort of the litmus test for truth, then there is no truth greater than my mind. Here you find then Dick's clarification. And I put some quotes on the side, but I sort of break it down maybe in a more philosophical way, to explain something that happens to each and every single one of us when it comes to knowledge, the way that we claim to know something. There's something really interesting. There's this deep and profound relationship between our minds, or our intellectual souls, right? So our intellect, and the world of things. And the reason why we know this is because we are not simply just sensual beings. Okay? So that when smell comes, right, and we take that in, right, we do more than just react based upon the physical presence of the smell. There's something that goes on that's different than animals. We have this ability to take in, say we smell something, recognize what the smell is, and either move towards it as we recognize it as something good, or we move away from it. So that sounds very similar to animals, but then you begin to realize that there's a difference. So that when you come into contact with something in the world, say me, the first day of class, I came in, I introduced myself, we spent the first 3 quarters together. And now we haven't seen each other for a considerable amount of time. But if someone asks you about Mr. Bach, you can, right, and this is a very interesting point of what the intellect can do, you can make me present to your mind even though I am not physically present. And it's not just simply memory. You can right now picture me, right, giving this lecture even though I am not present to you. Right? There's such a unity. There's a beautiful unity between your mind and things in this world, that when you come to know something, You come to sort of possess it in your mind. Something that is outside of you physically actually makes its home in your mind. And that's why you don't simply have to, every time, to do addition, someone doesn't have to put 2 plus 2 equals 4 for you to do it. Because you've learned the principles of addition, when anyone puts addition in front of you on a board, on a piece of paper, you can do it because you know the principles. But what do we mean by knowing the principles? The principles are located in your mind. Now, that does not mean that you are the sole creator then of those principles. You do not invent those principles. They are not yours to change. Your mind conforms to the reality, to a mathematical principle. Your mind conforms to who Jason Bach is. And when you recall, the closer you are in that unity between the mind and the real thing, the more you know. That's why the more time you spend with someone, the more they become present to you in your mind when they're not there. Okay. So in this case, then, what Dick is trying to clarify is that the fat ghost, seems to have it backwards, whereas everything in reality must conform to the idea that he already has in his mind. But that's not the way that knowledge works. Knowledge is the other way. This is why he says, become like a child. Children are great at this. They recognize that they don't know, that they don't have the proper idea, but how do they get it? By seeking it outside of themselves. And when they seek it and come into contact with it, it becomes a part of them. So much so that, Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas said that the mind, in some sense, becomes all things. So that when you have the definition of what a human is in your mind, the principles of mathematics in your mind, they become you. You are what you eat in this sense, not only physically, but intellectually. And what the fat ghost, what he does is he doesn't allow anything to enter his mind. He only sort of generates things from his mind and then projects it out onto the world and says, this is the way that it has to be. And this is what Dick is trying to convince him of, is that you have it backwards, that you need to turn it around, that if you conform to the truth, then the truth will be a part of you. But if you don't conform to the truth and you claim that you already have it, then no truth can be given. So in the end, the fat ghost walks away. He claims he cannot conform his mind to anything other than his mind. And because of this, the fat ghost claims, right, in some sense, very similar to the big ghost. And that's why I kept on the right, I know my rights, right? He really does think that he has a right to believe whatever he wants to believe. As long as it comes from his mind, right, then he has a right to hold it. But if you really think about that in life, not all opinions are valid. A good opinion is one that is closer to the truth. A bad opinion is one that moves away. So this is why it's important, because if I have the opinion that I can step out of my second-story window, jump, and fly like a butterfly, right, I can hold that opinion. But the problem is it doesn't have a unity with reality. So the moment that I attempt to do it is the moment, right, that reality, right, smacks me in the face, literally, because I fall, right, injure myself. You see, my thought has caused me to live out in the physical world actions that destroy me. And this is exactly what the fat ghost is doing. Because he says that reality has to conform to him, and he's sort of the generator of reality, that he's never really in touch with the real world. He's only in touch with the world that he manufactures in his mind. But if that's the case, then he's never really in touch with the real. And this is why, right, he's ghost. He's a ghost. He's a shadow of what is real. And he refuses to seek the truth. to see it. And he's right there in the sight of heaven. But because he's so caught up in his own mind, right, his vision is twisted. He does not see it for what it is. He only sees it for what he sees it as. And so he walks away and thinks that he's doing a good thing for doing so. But in the end, his mind, right, and the thing that he's caught up in will lead him, right, to the only thing, right, that when you remain trapped within your own mind, to the only fruit that it can bear, it is being caught up then only in yourself. But that's all you'll be left with, is yourself. But even in attempting to be, right, yourself, there's still something missing, because you are never your own. Remember, you're a gift. And so that by moving away, deeper into yourself, you actually move further away from you. And this is why he's deluded. And it all begins for the fat ghost. And I think in some sense for all of us, when it comes to sin, it always begins in the intellect. We begin to convince ourselves that we are correct in what we're doing. Oh, yeah, of course it's bad to cheat, but right, I needed to do it this time because, you see, we begin to convince ourselves, but we convince ourselves of a lie, which means then we are unifying with a lie, which means our lives become lies.